Hello, welcome to The Human Author, Episode 3. I'm Jen Cantwell, otherwise known as JB Cantwell, and today I'm working on the 5th book in my Light Chaser series, The Warning. It's an epic fantasy series and quite a bit dark as well. So a couple of things that I wanted to go through. First off, if any of you have questions, please go ahead and ask them in the chat. I don't look at comments as I'm working because it's too distracting. So I'll be able to see things after the fact. And at the beginning of each session, I can answer any questions that you might have. And if you're wondering what I'm doing and why I'm doing it, the best way to figure that out is to go to thehumanauthor.com. And there's a bunch of information on there about what I'm up to with this crazy live stream. So yesterday, I wrote 2,500 words, which was crazy. And I was actually trying to calm it down a little bit yesterday, but things got out of control. So last night, when I looked at what I had written, I realized that there was so much raw violence in what I did yesterday. And I love violence. I love killing off characters. It's one of those things. But it was too much. I made some changes, but I am going to go ahead and read what I did. And I think that what might end up happening in the future is I'm going to add some more content to that first chapter to build up some suspense before things go south. So today I'm going to go ahead and read what I did yesterday, and then I will continue my dictation. Okay, so this is halfway through chapter 1. It didn't take me very long to catch up with him, for even though his riding had improved immensely, I was still faster. I knew that Talon, the horse he rode, was a cautious beast. I'd ridden him myself for weeks and weeks. I knew this horse, and I knew he would be careful with a green rider on his back. Finally, when I was getting close enough to throw a curse, he dismounted and ran on foot, climbing up onto one of the larger rocks, my bag strapped to his back. "You don't need this," he yelled, and he reached into the bag and pulled out both of the remaining canteens. "This is ruining you." He removed the stoppers from both canteens, and what he did next I couldn't believe, for the magic of light had entranced me, and I thought it had entranced him too. I had been wrong. He held out the canteens and tipped them upside down, the light splashing onto the boulder he was standing upon. My mouth fell open and my stomach lurched as I watched my hard-earned light wasted by this. I was suddenly filled with great rage, something I had never felt before, not even when fighting Torin or his blasted sons. I jumped off Glory's back and began to climb up after him, quickly conjuring a fiery orb I knew would kill him on contact. I threw it towards him, but my aim was off, and he ducked out of its path. Then, seeming to understand just how great the danger was for him, he turned and ran full speed away from me. But that wasn't enough to stop me. What he'd done had been unforgivable, and I wasn't the forgiving type anyway. I sent another orb after him, missing again. I was new to that type of magic, and I would need to practice, but not now. Instead, I lit my hands with flame and threw a bolt of lightning straight at him. This time, my aim was true, and my curse hit him in the back, knocking him forward onto the rocks. I was closer now, and though I desperately wanted to hurt him, my pace slowed. I knew he wouldn't get up, not after a blast like that, but as I approached, I was disappointed to find him turning over, his face bloodied from the impact of the fall. "You can't do this," he said. "This isn't you, Bree. I know it." He put his hands up to protect himself, and it was so ridiculous that I laughed. I might have said something to him then, might have thanked him for his help, might have recalled our time together. But instead, I kept quiet. And when my boots were inches from his head, I straddled him and sat down on his chest. I wrapped my hands around his neck, desperate to bring him pain, and suddenly I felt no need to use my magic against him. No, I wanted to kill him with my bare hands. Thoughts flashed through my mind, memories about how Enya and I had saved this man from the trees, more memories about what we'd all been through together as we'd fought Aaron and prevailed, releasing what had been thousands of victims from the trees that skirted the outside of the kingdom of Zamira. But none of that seemed to matter now. This man had taken my light from me, my everything from me. He began to struggle, gripping onto my wrists and trying to weaken my hold as if he could. Then he dug his nails into my skin, trying to save himself as the lack of air made his eyes wide with terror. I was filled with something I'd never felt before, glee. It was a wicked feeling, but I was so desperate, so angry that I embraced it. I gripped onto his neck tighter, my teeth gritted, but it wasn't happening fast enough. And I started lifting his head and banging it against the rock beneath him. Blood trickled from his nose, and I could see it pooling beneath his head. For a moment, I was surprised by what I was doing. There was part of me that knew there was no turning back after this, but I didn't care. So, as Colm took his last breaths, I watched him fade from this life, and finally it was done. I was done. I sat back, looking down at his lifeless body, and slowly I felt the rage that had overtaken me draining away. I stared at him, trying to figure out what exactly had just happened. I'd killed before, of course. One couldn't be the one prophesied to kill the madman Torin without coming upon terrible dangers in the process. But even I knew this was different. My cheeks glowed hot, and I put my hands to them, trying to cool them with my icy fingers. But the relief from the cool touch of my fingers wasn't enough to calm me, and soon my breathing came in shallow gasps. What would I do? What had I done? Suddenly, I was so desperate that I checked him for a heartbeat, ignoring the blood on the rocks beneath his head. I put my hands on his chest and closed my eyes, pulsing healing power into his body. But I felt nothing. He felt nothing. I heard the snap of a twig and whirled around, certain that somehow I had been watched. I'd heard those snapping twigs before, but when I turned around and searched the valley on the west side of the foothills, I saw no one. I looked up toward the beginnings of the mountain range, but I was alone with him. Tears I hadn't noticed streamed down my face, and I squinted hard, sobbing into his chest. Colm had been a good man, not the fool I'd come to believe him to be. He didn't deserve what I'd done to him. After a while, as the rain began to ebb, I lifted my head from his body, and with my bloodied hands, I grabbed onto his feet and began pulling him off the boulder. Blearily, I realized that the effort was unnecessary. I was, of course, a sorceress, but as I began the enchantment, I saw something out of the corner of my eye that distracted me. It was the puddle of light he'd left behind. My eyes widened, and suddenly everything I'd done to Colm didn't matter at all. The inevitable consequences of what I'd done didn't matter at all. I guess that was twice there. Got to deal with that. I put down his feet and ran to it, climbing across the boulder desperately, then cupping my hands in an effort to save whatever light I could. But when I tried to bring the elixir to my mouth, I found most of it slipped through my fingers. Like an animal, I bent over and drank directly from the puddle, as a horse would from a trough. There it was, the feeling of the light flowing through me. One last time. Was it? I drained the little puddle, then lay my cheek down upon the cool stone. The rain was picking up again, but I didn't care. I felt every tendril of power within the light as it moved through my body, as aquamarine blood might have done. This is better than blood, stronger, and he took it from you. You will never feel this way again. My gaze hardened, and I sat up, then crawled back over to where I'd left his body. I had a job to do, no matter the terror I felt at what I'd done. And as I felt the hatred return, I suddenly didn't care about what I'd done at all. There was something about watching his body scrape against the rock that was satisfying to me. I did not use my magic again, and instead, fueled by the power of the light, I dragged him. Once I had him down from the boulder, I searched for a cave to hide him in. Out here, I knew no one would find him. This was a barren land, no humans anywhere, but still, cautious, cautious. Finally, after 10 minutes of searching, I found one large enough to hide his body. I dragged him deep into the cave, then peered out of the entrance into the rain. How easy it was for me to leave him behind. I left the cave and climbed up to the top of a boulder, looking around for my things. He'd dropped my bag, and there, lying uselessly upon the rock, were the 2 empty canteens. He'd had it coming. The struggle between right and wrong was sounding in my head, but I knew what I needed to do. I gathered up what remained of my things and strapped the pack onto my back. Then I reached out for Glory, who was looking at me with that sense of fear again. I didn't care. I grabbed onto her reins and mounted, then guided her over to where Talon stood. Ever the gentleman, he didn't seem fazed by what had just happened, and when he lifted his head, several long strands of grass poked out from the sides of his mouth. He was the calmest horse I had yet known. I grabbed his reins and pulled them over his head, then turned both horses away from the caves, away from all that had happened there, and made my way down from the foothills and into the grasslands beyond. I wondered, halfway through the night rain, if the fire I'd set in the cave was still alight. Perhaps it would only glow bright with me in close proximity to it. But I entertained the possibility that it would stay there indefinitely. Was my magic so strong? Yes. I'd made a decision a few hours back that I wouldn't meet my friends in the Tavern Forest after all. Instead, I would make my way home. I didn't need the questions that I would certainly face amongst my cohorts. The last time I'd seen them, I'd left them behind, fully intending to desert the army I'd helped create. I wondered how long it would take Enya to free the rest of the citizens of Zamira from the Togue forest. Would it be weeks? Months? There had been so many trapped, and this brought me a sense of calm, knowing that it would be a long while before I met with her again. She'd had every intention of joining us in the fight against Torin, but now I found myself relieved as I realized how much time I had to get away. Still filled with the energy light brought, I moved on through the rain and through the night. Finally, as dawn broke, the rain stopped and the sun crept up over the horizon. I found myself growing more tired. It seemed that no matter how much light I drank, it never lasted long enough. Not anymore. I scanned the land and looked for somewhere to hide, somewhere to stash the horses, whose noises would certainly give my location away. But there were no caves here in this vast valley, and I had no choice. I jumped down from Glory's back, my boots sticking in the mud, then tied the reins of both horses around their necks and left them to their grazing. Out here in the open, I was taking a risk. I might be spotted by anyone, and if not me, the horses would certainly be seen. But there was little choice, and as the light drained from my system, I found myself exhausted. I laid down right there in the wet grass, vaguely comforted by its height. I remembered that day with Oriana when we'd run from the lawmen in Eagleview. We'd laid back then too, but as But I was forcibly reminded now that we'd been found, and that had been one of the last days I'd seen her. What would she think about me now? I sat up on my elbows, peering over the blades that camouflaged me, but there was no one. No one on my trail, and no one who knew me or what my obligations were. I laid back down, but as I tried closing my eyes and drawing sleep as closely as I could, none came. I stared up into the brightening sky, and I was unable to sleep at all. No one knows. I took some comfort in this. I began to practice. He fell ill. We were out of light, and there was nothing I could have done to save him. He fell from his horse, cracking his neck on the hard dirt below. He froze. These options were ridiculous, I knew, for if he'd continued to follow me, everyone I knew already understood that I could have saved him, that he couldn't have frozen under my watch. I tried again, but this time nothing came. This story would have to protect me, and I was comforted by the fact that I had some time between now and confronting my friends. My friends. No, I wouldn't go to the Tavern Forest. I would let them be. We'd once said we would meet in Eagleview, and though part of me desired to escape, to run away from the terrible thing I'd done, what I wanted more than anything was to go home. I knew where I could get more light, right back in Eagleview. I laid there for several hours, sleep never having come. Eventually, I sat up and found both horses grazing nearby. This time, Talon would be mine. He had more of a level head than the mare. Still, I knew how important it was for me to keep her along for the ride. She was valuable, and if I was able to find a town between where I stood and Eagleview, I was certain she would fetch a high price. Father would not appreciate the horse, but he would appreciate the silver that might come from trading her. Best to get it done before anybody had questions, because I didn't have answers, not good ones. Not yet. Shame came to me in unexpected bursts as I imagined the light in my future. I knew that the head sorcerer of Eagleview, Zahn, had an immense pool of light of his own. He sent his pupils out into the world to gather it for him. I didn't pretend to know why he did this, other than the assumption that he was using it for himself. He was an old man, tall and thin and mean. He'd nearly killed me on my way out of Eagleview, something I wouldn't soon forget. But I had prevailed. He hadn't been able to kill me, surely embarrassing himself in front of the crowd that had gathered behind him to watch me leave. I hadn't looked back then, had kept going once our fight was over. It had been a blessing in disguise, for I'd come to the realization that I could protect myself, and being able to thwart a man like Zahn was tricky indeed. I wondered who was left there. Were my childhood friends still running around in the dirty market I'd left behind? I remembered Kenneth, a dark boy who'd frequently requested my kisses. Of course, he usually ended up on the ground, a curse given in lieu of a kiss. Was he there? Would he remember me? Would he recognize me? All right, that was yesterday. I'm going to go ahead and set us up with today's file. Would father, ? New line. Grandmother, ? New line. My stomach sank as I thought of Regan, comma. Her little brother as well, period. Surely she would be able to see through me. semicolon. She'd been affected by the light in a way none of us understood, period. She'd been practically dead, comma. But the cap light that pooled at the great horse's feet had been enough to bring her, period. She had emerged from the pool entirely different, comma. But I knew she would protect my father and Brennan, period. New line. No, comma. I wasn't sure about any of this, comma. But I resolved to hide what I'd done, comma. And if I need, comma, I would stay away from her, period. Maybe she was gone already, comma, beaten down by the lawmen of Eagleview, period. New line. Regan was the biggest risk I faced. When I finally arrive home, period. New line. One thing at a time, period. New line. I pulled out Oriana's map, comma, the one she'd made for our trip that had never happened, period. It had many cities, comma, kingdoms, comma, and mountain ranges, comma, but I was unable to find my bearings, period. I had ended up in a grassy valley, comma, but it was not listed on the map, period. Was I completely lost? Question mark. New line. I folded up the map after a few minutes of searching, then stood up and mounted Cap Talon, period. New line. Open quote. Breakfast is over, comma, close quote, I said to him, period. I grabbed for Cap Glory's reins, period. Comma. And as the afternoon aired, comma, we moved out, period. Of course, I forgot to set my alarm. Let's go down here. Okay. New line. The farther I went, comma, the farther east, comma, the more anxious I was to finally get there, period. I would deal with Regan when I met her, comma. But would I kill her, comma, too? Question mark. New line. No, period. You can't, period. I couldn't kill everybody, period. No, comma. My story would have to be watertight, period. The afternoon dragged on, and though I was eager to move faster, I wasn't able to handle much more than a trot, and in the chilly afternoon, undo. In the chilly afternoon, steam rose from the horses' necks, period. I go on like this indefinitely, so eventually I let them walk, period. On and on we went, with nothing visible on the horizon, period. But finally, as the sun began to sink toward the horizon, I could see something in the distance, period. Was it a mountain? ? There were mountains on my map, and maybe this was the beginning of the soaring cap mountains that had eluded me, period. New line. I picked up a trot again, and soon a gallop. I wanted to get there, wanted to find a place to hide for the night, period. I had had enough of being so exposed, undo, semicolon. I had so much to hide, so many that didn't make sense yet, period. New line. But as I neared the thing I saw was not a mountain at all, but a forest, period. New line. As soon as I realized I was looking at trees, I pulled up on Talon's reins, period. Pulled him to a complete stop, period. He was breathing heavily, as was Cap Glory, but it wasn't due to my desire to have them take a break, period. I hadn't stopped. New line. I had stopped out of fear, period. New line. I'd had many experiences with unknown forests in the past 6 months, period. And while I knew what to expect in the Kaya, or even the This place known, period. Both places had had an evil of their own, semicolon. Would this forest be the same? Question mark. New line. I looked south, comma, but all I could see was trees and mountains, period. Comma, none of which were listed on my map, period. As frightened as I was, comma, I knew that traveling through the mountains would be harder than going through the forest, comma, even if there were people within it wanted me dead, period. New line. So, comma, I urged Talon forward, comma, glory, undo, cap glory, following reluctantly behind, period. Did she see? Didn't. Question mark. Dogs could sense danger, comma, I knew that, period. But could horses? Question mark. Horses were known to shy at simple things, comma, a boulder, comma, a shoulder bag left on the side of the road, comma, anything that looked unusual, flighty eyes, period. New line. But to go south, I would be forced into a much more dangerous position, period. Sorry for all the coughing. No. Test. After another hour of travel, comma, we reached the first trees of the forest, period. I paused the horses, comma, listening carefully. The place looked friendly, comma, and it did not have a tune like some of the other forests I'd been in, period. Those places had been enchanted, comma, filled with danger, period. New line. You can handle danger, period. You've, period. New line. But my most recent experience in an unknown forest had nearly been the death of me, period. I tried to push the memory of the out of my mind, comma, unwilling to remember my first meeting with Colm, period. New line. We entered the forest, comma, and I kept watch, comma, searching for any danger, period. But, comma, just like the surrounding lands, comma, the trees were empty, period. I looked around at the ground as we walked through, comma, but I didn't see anything, comma, nothing alive, period. I wondered if somehow this place had stolen the lives of animals that might have lived there, period. New line. I wouldn't let it steal mine, period. But as we walked through, comma, shadows played with my mind, period. And then, comma, there was that telltale crack of a twig I had heard so many times in recent days, period. I whipped around, comma, eager to meet the threat, comma, to run it down and squash it beneath the hooves of the horses, period. But when I lit my hands in the growing darkness, comma, I once again saw nothing, period. New line. That didn't last, comma, though, period. Comma. For up ahead, I saw one of those shadows that had put me on edge, comma. Only this one wasn't the shadow of a tree or a branch, period. It was the shadow of a boy, period. New line. I moved closer to him, comma. My body filled with fear and hope, period. Could it be him? Question mark. New line. I had lost Quinn to Torin months before, comma. The young boy who had been my charge, period. He'd been taken from me, comma. Taken from the giantess Duna as well, period. In those final moments within the she had gripped onto his foot, comma, flying away into the darkness as Torin took him, period. New line. I wondered if she was still alive, period. New line. The boy began to walk away, comma, and I kicked Talon's sides, comma, eager to find out who he was, period. New line. Open quote, wait, exclamation point, close quote, I called, period. Open quote, wait, exclamation point, close quote, new line. New line. Surprisingly, comma, he stopped, comma. And as Talon and Cap Glory walked up to him, comma, he turned, period. New line. It's him, period. New line. But was it, comma, really? Question. And if so, comma, why? Question mark. New line. I didn't trust what I was seeing, comma. For here before me was a reminder of the great loss I'd felt when he was taken, period. Of the great I'd felt, comma, shame at having lost him, period. At all, period. New line. I jumped down from Talon's back, comma, making sure to hold on to the reins, period. Slowly, comma, I approached him, comma. And soon I found that my eyes were not playing tricks on me at all, period. It was him, comma. It was Quinn, period. New line, how, question mark. New line. Open quote. Quinn, question mark, close quote, I said, period. Open quote. Is it really you, question mark, close quote. New line. I bent down to look him in the eye, comma. But I saw only a blank stare, period. I'd seen him look this way before, comma. But for some reason, it alarmed me now more than it had then, period. Maybe it was because I was alone, comma, traveling without his big sister, comma. Iona, period. Or maybe it was because of what I'd done to Colm, period. Colm, period. Would he know, question mark. New line. I wrapped my arms around him, comma, hugging him so tightly that when I stood up, his feet left the ground, period. I turned around with him, comma, swirling him, undo, twirling him, period, comma. Joy filling me unexpectedly, period. With Colm's death, comma, I'd convinced myself that I would not feel again, period. But here he was, comma, alive and safe in my arms, period. Slowly, comma, I put him back onto his feet, and looked him in the eye, period. New line, open quote. Quinn. Question mark. What? Question mark. Where is Duna? Question mark. Are you okay? Question mark. Close quote. New line. He didn't answer, comma, not any of the questions, comma, and his gaze remained blank, period. As he stared right through me, comma, my heart fell, period. I was this way once before, comma, and it hadn't ended well, period. But then, comma, his eyes slowly focused, comma, and he looked into mine, period. New line, open quote. Where is he? Question mark, close quote, he asked, period. New line, open quote. Where's who? Question mark, close quote. Quinn looked around, comma, seemed confused to find himself in a forest, period. New line, open quote. Where have you been? Question mark, close quote. As he looked at me, comma, tears began to pool in his eyes, comma, then spilled onto his cheeks, period. New line, quote, I, ... I couldn't find you, period. You disappeared, period. Where did he take you? Question mark, clues, undo. Question mark. When Nechanas close quote, had stolen the boy and brought him to Torin, comma, his gaze had been blank then, comma, too, period. But now, comma, he was at me, comma, seemingly unharmed, period, comma. New line. But I knew that harm was much worse inside one's body and mine than it could ever be on the outside, period. New line, open quote. Where is he? Question mark. Here, question mark, close quote. His voice was so little, comma, so frightened, period. New line, open quote. Who? Question mark, close quote, I asked, period. I looked around through the trees, comma, but the darkness was coming so fast that I saw nothing, period. New line, open quote. We have to find him, comma, close quote, he said, period. Open quote. He told me to find him once I found you, period. Close quote. He took my hand and pulled me away from the horses, period. I was so distracted that I didn't undo. I dropped their reins and followed, period. New line. Open quote. Who are you looking for? Question mark, close quote, I asked after a few minutes, period. New line, open quote. For Cap Master, period. Close quote. And now it's crashing. Everything is crashing. Just a moment. I'm not a big fan of PCs. Or Word, for that matter. Okay, well, in the meantime, something's happening. There we go. He told me to find you, period. Undo. Close quote. Line. My blood ran cold at these words, period. There was only one man I could think of who probably, undo, who would have demanded that this boy call him a master, period. For everyone else in Torin's world obeyed him, semicolon. He was the ultimate master, period. New line. Suddenly, comma. A flash in my mind distracted me, comma. The image of Colm's face with my hands wrapped around his neck, period. New line. My stomach tightened, comma. And for a moment, I thought I might be sick, period. New line. Was I, comma, had I become, comma, as violent as that vile man, question mark. New line. No, comma, it couldn't be, period. I was just a girl. Only 18 years of experience inside of me, period. Had I, undo, would I become as evil as Torin was, question mark. New line. New line. Undo. I pulled back on Quinn's hand, comma, turning him to face me, period. New line, open quote. Why do you want to go to him? Question mark, close quote, I asked, period. Open quote. He took you from me, comma, took from me, comma, and so many others, period. Why do we have to face him now? Question mark, close quote, new line. The truth was, comma, that despite all of the death and destruction that Torin and his minions had created, comma, I was terrified of meeting him, comma, myself, period. I might have nearly beaten Zahn, comma, but Torin was an entirely new threat, period. I'd only ever seen him in my dreams, comma, fighting those he sent to take me, period. I was certain now that had been his intention, period. Why he didn't have them kill me, comma, I didn't know, period. But I did know that the time was quickly approaching where, undo, when I would be forced to face him, period. Comma, my side, new line. Did. I wasn't ready, period. New line. Undo. I wasn't sure if I would ever be ready, period. New line, open quote. And what will he do with you if you deliver me? Question mark. Close quote. New line. It was then that Quinn wrenched his hand out of mine, comma, turning to look at the trees once more, period. New line, open quote. If I can't bring you, he told me I must return alone. And tell him, period. He said that M dash, close quote, close quote. There was the sound of a crack. Undo. Cracking twig, comma. And this time when I turned around, comma, I was ready for a fight, period. There, not, undo, comma, not 10 feet away from me was Torin, comma, a wide smile upon his face, period. I took several steps, comma, suddenly forgetting Quinn and all he represented, period. It wasn't long before I felt the strong desire to run, comma, and I didn't care about Quinn, comma, only about myself, period. New line. But when I turned to run, comma, I found that not only was Quinn gone, comma, but both horses had disappeared as well, period. I barely realized this, comma, so distracted I was by my terror, period. I ran flat out away from Torin, comma, certain that if I'd stayed, comma, it would be the end of me, period. New line. What about Quinn? Question mark. New line. But it didn't matter, period. The boy was gone again, comma, and I had no choice but to flee, period. New line. I ran and ran, comma, and soon my face and arms were scratched by the low-hanging branches of the trees, period. In the distance, comma, I heard laughter, comma, and I felt certain it belonged to Torin, period. Torin, comma, whom I'd only ever met in my dreams, period. New line. Was this one of them, comma, too, question mark. Could I find comfort if only I could get myself to awaken, period. Question mark. New line. I finally stopped running, comma, slapping myself in the face again and again. Period. New line. Open quote. Wake up! Exclamation point. Wake up! Exclamation point. Close quote. New line. I didn't wake up, comma, undo, semicolon. Instead, comma, I fell to my knees, comma, desperate for relief from this stress, comma, from the feeling, constant feeling of fear carrying with me since I'd met the tortoise cap keeper in those very first days of my journey away from Eagleview, period. I knew there was only one way to relieve it, comma, relieve it. Only one way for me to extract myself from the traps Torin set for me again and again, period. New line. One day, comma, I would kill him, period. And it would mean more than Colm's death had. did, period. I would be celebrated, comma. Worshipped, comma, even, period. I would be forgiven for all of my wrongs, period. New line. I imagined the scene of what might await me upon my return to Eagle View, period. Would the people I'd left behind be safe? Question mark. All right. That is it for today. 2,110 words. That's a little bit more realistic. And I know it was probably a little bit slow. But just a reminder that every day I will be reading what I did the day before. So if you don't have time to sit here, you can just tune in for the first 10 or 15 minutes each morning at 9 o'clock Pacific and hear a slightly edited version of what I did the day before. So thank you for joining me. I hope you'll check out thehumanauthor.com. And I look forward to doing this again. It's been fun. If you have any questions, please put them in the comments and I will answer them for you tomorrow. Have a